It's important to remember the difference between the shoulder girdle and the shoulder joint. The shoulder girdle is the scapula and clavicles. The shoulder joint is where the head of the humerus fits into the glenoid fossa created by the shoulder girdle. The movements of the shoulder girdle are retraction, protraction, elevation, depression, and to illustrate upward and downward rotation, I'll place my hand on Terry's scapula, and as she abducts, you can see my hand upwardly rotate with the scapula, and as she lowers, you can see the downward rotation of the scapula. The movements of the shoulder joint are flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, internal rotation, external rotation, and finally circumduction, which can look different, like a shoulder roll, or like you're doing a backstroke, or like you're doing a forward stroke. The movements of the shoulder girdle are retraction, protraction, elevation, depression, upward and downward rotation. The movements of the shoulder joint are flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, internal rotation, external rotation, and finally circumduction. The shoulder girdle and the shoulder joint dance a lovely duet called the scapulohumeral rhythm. In order for the humerus to abduct higher than 90 degrees or flex higher than 45 to 60 degrees, the scapula must get out of the way in order to accommodate the head of the humerus. Upward and downward rotation of the scapula accomplishes this. We'll use abduction as our model. As the humerus rises towards 90 degrees, the head of the humerus approaches the acromion process. The scapula, specifically the acromion process, must get out of the way in order for the humerus to go above 90 degrees. Otherwise, the head of the humerus and the acromion process have an unpleasant collision, as you see on the graphic on your screen. Figure A shows the humerus abducted to 30 degrees and the scapula in neutral. Figure B shows the scapula upwardly rotated, leaving a clear pathway for the head of the humerus. The dark gray scapula in Figure B shows the scapula in neutral. Upward rotation refers to the acromion process, clavicle, and glenoid fossa rotating upward. You can feel the upward and downward rotation of your own scapula. Place 2 fingers on your clavicle and walk them laterally to where you feel the clavicle meets the acromion process at the acromioclavicular joint. Now externally rotate your humerus and abduct. And you should feel the acromion process in the clavicle upwardly rotating towards the ceiling, and then as you lower, you'll feel the downward rotation. The two muscles responsible for upward rotation of the scapula are the trapezius and the serratus anterior. Now, since these two muscles tend to be locked short, they are likely candidates for impeding healthy rotator cuff function. If they're not performing their job duties correctly, they would be interfering with the scapulohumeral rhythm. So perhaps the scapula isn't upwardly rotating soon enough, thereby causing a small collision of the head of the humerus with the acromion process, resulting in impingement syndrome. Impingement syndrome affects the long head of the biceps, the subacromial bursa, and the supraspinatus tendon. Now, impingement syndrome can also be caused by too many years of internally rotating and abducting the humerus, and we will discuss this next. Now let's consider that nasty and pervasive habit of letting the shoulders roll forward into internal rotation. Study the graphic on your screen and notice the position of the greater tubercle. Let's find the lesser and greater tubercles on ourselves. Place your fingers on the anterior shoulder, the upper part of the humerus, and poke around till you feel the first bump that you come to. And you're on the lesser tubercle, which is the attachment site for several muscles, including the subscapularis tendon. So let's do a little cross-fiber friction there. Now, just lateral to the lesser tubercle is the bicipital groove, the home of the long head of the biceps. So you just have to move your fingers just a tiny bit and let them sink into that groove. And let's do a little cross-fiber friction there so you can get a feeling for the long head of the biceps, which helps to stabilize the shoulder joint. Now, just lateral to that is the greater tubercle. Again, an attachment site for a number of muscles, including the supraspinatus tendon, which attaches to the top of the greater tubercle. So move your fingers superiorly just a little bit and do some cross-fiber friction. Is yours talking to you? Mine is. The graphic on your screen shows the humerus in a neutral position. Notice that part of the clavicle has been removed to better show the structures of the supraspinatus muscle and tendon and the subacromial bursa. When the humerus is internally rotated, the greater tubercle rolls forward, taking the supraspinatus tendon and the tendons of the infraspinatus and teres minor along for the ride. Since the supraspinatus attaches to the top of the greater tubercle, it will collide with the acromion process if the humerus is abducted in the internally rotated position, as shown in the graphic on your screen. Try it out on yourself, and you'll feel the restriction of the greater tubercle colliding with the acromion process. Just imagine how many times people do this on any given day. You can see why this muscle tendon unit is so frequently torn or impinged. Surgical repair may be necessary to restore function. In fact, this superior aspect of the shoulder joint is called the impingement area. The subacromial bursa lies above the supraspinatus and underneath the acromion process, and of course, it too suffers from irritation and inflammation when impinged. Let's turn our attention to the long head of the biceps. The short head of the biceps has been cut out of the graphic on your screen. Habitual internal rotation will cause that tendon to rub against either the lesser or greater tubercles, causing micro-tearing, impingement, and inflammation. Internal rotation is our friend. It allows us to do many movements, but it's not a friendly position to call home. Home position for bones should be in neutral. In neutral, our wonderful bones can be the weight-supporting structures they were designed for and transfer weight through the center of the joints. With our bones centered in their proper homes, our muscles can cease to be weight-supporting structures, giving them the freedom to move our bones and allowing us to move with greater ease and vitality and to express ourselves through our bodies. You've just seen some graphics which illustrate what structures are at risk when you internally rotate and abduct your humerus. So let's try it on ourselves right now. Internally rotate and abduct one of your arms, and right about 90 degrees you're going to feel a little impediment or a little block in the movement. You can still get your arm up all the way to 180 degrees, but we're going to compare it to abduction and external rotation. It'll feel very different. So now externally rotate your humerus and bring your arm up. Feels very different, right? It's an easy, fluid, graceful movement. Now let's do the same thing with the humerus in neutral. Again, feels very different than the internal rotation and abduction. So what you're feeling when you internally rotate and abduct is the greater tubercle colliding with the acromion process. Remember our friends, the Bulldog and the Great Dane? Well, we're going to revisit them right now. I'll review what they look like. In Bulldog, the elbows are bent, the head of the humerus is internally rotated, the scapula is protracted, and the weight is being transferred in a zigzag manner, requiring the muscles to do some of the work of the bones. Whereas in Great Dane, the elbows are lengthened, the triceps are spiraled in towards each other, and the scapula is retracted. Now notice that all my joints are lined up and my wrists are not ahead or in front of my shoulders. So the weight is being transferred through the center of the joints here. A great easy assessment tool that you can use with your clients is to ask them to get down on their hands and knees, and you'll be surprised how many people go right into Bulldog. So it's a great opportunity to educate your clients about the do's and don'ts of shoulder mechanics and to increase proprioception in that area. I do want to take a minute here and talk about a common yoga pose that's done in almost every Hatha yoga class, and that's downward facing dog. And this is the pose where I injured my rotator cuff. So in downward dog, the wrists are in front of the shoulders and the hips are piked up. So you want to educate your clients to really spiral those triceps into each other and squeeze the shoulder blades together, anchoring them on the rib case, and to maintain that during the whole pose. Another easy assessment tool that you can use with your clients is to ask them to pretend to reach up and get a coffee cup that's on a shelf above them. And here's what to look for. Does your client reach up directly through flexion to get that coffee cup in what I call the Heil Hitler movement? Or does your client go through an indirect route through abduction and internal rotation? Which do you think is the least stressful, more efficient movement pattern? If your client reaches for that coffee cup Via internal rotation and abduction, you've just identified an important causative and perpetuating factor in their shoulder dysfunction.